advisory board members to join us, and we'll begin shortly. I want to remind members from the public who are joining us, we appreciate you participating in the process. This is a meeting that is open to the public. It is not a public meeting, but we appreciate those who would be coming this evening to share their thoughts in regards to the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project. Please govern yourselves accordingly. There is a number there, 971-247-1195, that you can be prepared to dial if you plan to share public testimony with us today. Also, there's a number listed if you're having technical difficulties. So we appreciate your passion, your heart. We thank you for understanding and consideration. This opportunity is for those members from the historic Albina community to participate in this process. Those who have been historically left out of processes like these. We appreciate ODOT leadership for giving us the opportunity to engage around this topic and provide some opportunity for restorative justice, economic improvement for a community that has traditionally been marginalized. So we thank you for joining us today. Please follow the directions to raise your hand. There will be an opportunity for public comment shortly. Appreciate your patience. We're going to give just a couple more minutes as we wait for additional members of the Historic Albina Advisory Board to join us today.
Can you hear me, Erica?
I can, Andrew. So glad to have you today.
Can you see me too?
I can.
All right.
Thank you for being with us.
Oh, I love being with you guys.
Well, I want to be conscious of our time. We have such a significant amount of information to share with you this evening, discussion we would love to have with community members. And so I want to make sure that we are being conscious of that. Thank you again to all of you who have just joined us today for the Historic Albina Advisory Board meeting. Next slide, please, Ms. Natalie. Today, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. Then we will have some committee updates from facilitators and strategic advisors on this process to share with you what's going on with other committees doing this work. We're going to give an update in regards to the project rebranding. And then we will have an in-depth discussion with the independent cover assessment team as they share with you the workshop that many community stakeholders have already been through, and we will facilitate a conversation, a dialogue in regards to potential for the highway covers. So next slide, please. You all have been really great with this. I'll give you a quick reminder, our principles of agreement and how we plan to engage in this conversation. Your voice matters. So Historic Albina Advisory Board members, I may be calling upon you. I want to make sure that I'm engaging all of you to hear your wisdom, your thoughtfulness in regards to this project. Please feel free to be authentic, to speak your truth. We need to hear what is inside of you, your passion for this community, and we appreciate your presence here. While we're speaking, understand we need you to listen for understanding. So that means sometimes holding our thoughts as we listen to our colleagues who are sharing information, who are asking questions, making sure we understand what they're saying before we respond. In this environment, oftentimes we'll have passionate discussion. So we want to make sure we're reminding you to deal with issues and not with people. In that, we often will experience some discomfort, but the great part about that is we grow often in places of discomfort. So this can be an opportunity for us to expand beyond ourselves. We ask that you would remain respectfully engaged. Those members of the HAAB who can and are able to, we appreciate seeing your faces today and in being able to engage with you. We know that this online environment is not ideal, but we appreciate being able to engage in as much of a personal way as we can. And then with that, we cannot solve all of the ails of Historic Albina, of Black Portland in this meeting. We cannot solve all of those ails with this one project. So we expect and accept non-closure. We're going to continue to be responsive to your questions, to your ideals, and please hold us accountable to that. We thank you for your engagement, and we'll move forward. Next slide, please. I want to just again reiterate things that I have shared with you in the past. We appreciate the willingness to do things differently, for ODOT leadership to understand and acknowledge the harms of the past, and to give Historic Albina members, community members, the Black community of Portland, the opportunity to participate in this very important project. We have an opportunity for public comment, and so we ask that you would keep your comments to 1 minute. We want you to know that your voice is important, it is valuable, and we understand that 1 minute is often not enough time to share all of the thoughts, but there are other ways for you to communicate your feelings, ask your questions. Please feel free to send an email. There is a voicemail number that you can leave a message, and we will do our best to be responsive to those comments, to those thoughts, to those requests. Those who are in our public area waiting room, please make sure that you have dialed in. You dial *9 to raise your hand. Ms. Mira and Natalie will be assisting me this evening with the public comment. Please, I appreciate your understanding. I will be holding us to that 1 minute, but please take advantage of all of the other opportunities to make your voice be heard. Ms. Mira, we can move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Erica. Just a friendly reminder, if you're joining us via the live stream this evening, please remember to mute the video to reduce background noise. Anyone wishing to make a live public comment is welcome to, but time will be limited to 1 minute, as Ms. Erica said, which is consistent across project committees. Comments running longer than 60 seconds will be interrupted. And that, a few more things. It's nothing personal, it's just that we need to remain consistent with the expectations established across the different committees in order to preserve meeting time for the HAAB members and present all the issues before them. As a reminder, we welcome you to provide more extensive comments to be shared with the committee members outside of meeting times by email or by phone, as detailed on this meeting's agenda. With that, I'll bring up my digital timer. So I'm going to share my screen here. Can everyone see the digital timer? Okay. Ready for our first caller. Okay, I'm looking. Okay. Okay. Caller with the last four digits, 4524. Are you with us? May want to press *6 to unmute. Okay. I'm not sure that they're still with us, so we'll move on. Caller with the last four digits, 8577.
Mira, sorry,
Yes.
it looks like the phone number ending in 4524 just unmuted.
Okay. Okay.
Hi,
Go
this is
back.
Joe Courtwright. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We
Hi,
can,
this is
Mr.
Joe
Courtwright.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Before my time begins, can I just have the staff verify that 3 items I submitted electronically yesterday or 2 days ago in advance of the meeting are available or have been distributed to the folks there?
Yes, I
Great.
will
Thank you
assure
so
you,
much.
Mr. Courtwright, that we have distributed them to the Historic Albina Advisory Board, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So very quickly, as you'll see from those materials, they document the destruction of the Albina neighborhood that was really engineered by the Oregon Department of Transportation's decision to build 3 major highway facilities through the neighborhood, beginning in the early 1950s with Interstate Avenue, continuing to I-5, and then including the ramps to the Fremont Bridge. Those freeways destroyed hundreds of units of housing and led to the destruction of the neighborhood and the loss of about 60% of the population in a little over 20 years. There can be no restorative justice in Albina without housing. The materials you'll see presented by the Covers Group today show proposals for housing. You'll see yellow blobs that indicate where housing could be. But to build the amount of housing that's shown in those diagrams, you'll need between $160 million and $260 million. Simply drawing pictures of housing on a map doesn't get housing
10
built
seconds left.
unless ODOT includes the money, the $250 million at least, to show what's on those maps. There is no restorative justice. Don't be.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Miss Erica, this is Leslie Goodlow.
Yes, I appreciate your comment. Yes, ma'am.
Or do we have more people to do public comment?
I think we do have a few more, but I'm okay with HAAB members having response.
Well, I'm just wondering, the gentleman that just spoke, who are you? Who do you represent? And I appreciate the comments about the housing, but you're giving us information that we already have. Those of us that live in Albina or have lived in Albina, I've lived here for 50 years. So I'm not sure what the point of your commentary was, except for that there's housing needed, and we know that PBOT can't pay for housing. That's not what their money can pay for. So I'm not disparaging your comments. I'm just not sure where we're supposed to go with it. I know you can't answer, but I'm just I'm just not clear about the context.
I appreciate Ms. Leslie. Mr. Courtwright, if you're still participating in the meeting, I would appreciate, as you had before, if you would submit an email. I would love to hear your response. I appreciate HAAB members having the opportunity to be able to respond to the public comment. So Ms. Mira, we can move forward with the next caller. And Estelle, I do see your hand, and so I will come to you shortly.
Thank you, Erica. We have caller with the last four digits, 8920. Caller with the last four digits, 8920. Are you with us this evening? Can you hear us?
Hello.
Yes. Thank
Hello?
you. We can hear
Yes. Okay, yes. My name is Michael Fesser. I'm with Going Home Too, and I have a car lot here. And I think I've been doing this community work for over the last 10 years, and I think it's very important for us to keep the employment for guys coming home and establishing themselves in the community and back in the community. It helps us become homeowners and business owners.
Thank
And I
you.
do not think, okay.
Oh, you have 30 seconds left.
Oh, and I was just saying, and my last thing is I just hope that they do not stop or delay this, because it will bring more tragedy to our community and guys will not be able to provide for their families. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, I'm looking and I'm seeing caller with the last 4 digits, 4340. Caller with the last 4 digits, 4340. Can you hear us? You may have to take yourself off of mute by pressing *6. Okay. I no longer see them in the waiting room. Should we?
That's all right. I think they
Move on.
they may return. I see one more additional hand raised with the number ending in 8577.
77. Yes.
Good afternoon. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm calling in to express my genuine gratitude for the HAAB and HAAB facilitators. You've spent almost 15 hours on this committee. Having listened to these meetings, there's no question in my mind that each of you are truly committed to the future of the Albina neighborhood and pushing for a future in which Albina is once again a thriving, healthy, prosperous Black community. I'm calling in with a question. Given your time on this committee, do you believe ODOT shares this commitment to this outcome? Or are they just asking for a rubber stamp for this toxic, polluting freeway expansion? At the last meeting, HAAB member John Washington was gracious enough to ask the question I posed to you in the public testimony. Mr. Washington asked ODOT's hired air quality consultants if they ever reviewed the accuracy of ODOT's traffic data. And to her credit, the consultant told the truth and said no, they did not independently verify ODOT's data. That means every single word ODOT has told to the HAAB and to the public about the air pollution impacts of this freeway is simply not true. That means ODOT has been deliberately lying to you about how much air pollution this project will bring to the Albina neighborhood, how many students get asthma, how many community elders get lung cancer and dementia, and that data was based on a 6-lane highway. Our public records show that the freeway is going to be even wider. ODOT asked you to be on this board and you accepted it because you genuinely wanted to help shape the future of this neighborhood. ODOT responded by
Thank
not
you for
telling you
your
about the air
comments.
pollution, but instead spent 45 minutes at the last meeting
Thank you for
asking
your
to
comments.
listen to a presentation about a new logo. Please don't let ODOT.
Ms. Muir, do we see others in the waiting room? I do not. Mrs. Stella, I would love to have you unmute and share your comment with.
I would just like to add on to Ms. Goodlow's comments and just say that I take great offense to some of the tone of these comments. The paternalistic tone that we as Albina residents or the descendants of Albina residents would not only be educated or not only have real life experience as the residents of these committees. Not only do we have lived experience or individuals as educated individuals to be able to provide our own analysis of people who would seek out these materials. We already have seen these things. We're not just sitting here as warm bodies. You do not have to alert us to anything. We come to this committee as fully formed individuals. On top of our own experiences, on top of the legacies that we represent, We come to it with our professional, our educational experiences. You don't need to tell us anything. I'm sorry if excuse my tone. Please, I apologize. I don't need to disrespect my peers. But some of the things I see happening, I'm so offended, I can barely contain it. Okay? And I come here and my auntie, I'm Mrs. Yee's niece. And Mrs. Yee, my auntie, she was on the Model Cities Committee. And if they would have done their research, they would know who I'm here representing. Okay? So I'm here representing her legacy. And if I have to turn this out like she would turn those meetings out, I'll do that. I would prefer to not do that, but I will. You don't have to come here and tell me about my people or tell me about my neighborhood or tell me about anything. Full stop. This isn't that kind of space. This is our space. Stop. We're educated people. We're educated people. If you fully have read the minutes, as you say you have, we're asking the questions. We are providing analysis. You know, I'm sorry, I'm greatly offended. I'm greatly offended. We represent legacies. We represent generations. And these people think they're educating us or that we need their amplifications. Hard pass. And that's my response. Excuse me, peers.
Ms. Estelle, I appreciate your passion. I appreciate the sensitivity to your colleagues on the Historic Albina Advisory Board. But we asked you to be in this space to be yourself, to be authentically you. And ODOT leadership and the project leadership have given us this space so that we can engage and ask the tough questions. And I think that the tough responses are a part of this process. So I appreciate your willingness to be authentic, appreciate your willingness to continue to engage. And I hope that community members will take into consideration some of the thoughts that were shared here. So I appreciate you. Thank you, Ms. Estelle. Ms. Mira, are you seeing any additional public commenters? I don't see any additional hands.
Yes, I am. We have a caller with the last four digits, 4340.
Okay.
And I'll admit
We
them
have
now.
time. Yes, we have time for one additional public comment. So I appreciate, caller, you unmuting yourself and giving us your public comment.
Caller with
Hello,
the last.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
So 4340.
Yes. We're ready
Okay,
for your
thank you.
comments.
Okay. My name is Kamal Rogers. I'm president of Coalition of Black Men, also a person who lived off what is now the Alberta exit and grew up on that street before there was a freeway and after. I never saw any people looking like me driving trucks or working on that. Our view is that we want to see this project continue because people need jobs and careers, and that's what this project can do for our community at this point in time. And so that's the view of COBM and our economic development team and some of the other members as well as COBM. So thank you for that. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate your time as well.
Thank you, Ms. Mira, for your assistance with the public comment section. Again, we appreciate all of you bringing your passion for the community into this space. Ms. Natalie, if you would continue to share the slides with us, we're going to move forward in the meeting. I want to just acknowledge the Historic Albina Advisory Board members who are in the virtual space with us. So quickly, I'm just going to call your name if you would just acknowledge letting us know that you're in the room. Ms. Srinivasa Brown.
Present.
Mr. Andrew Campbell.
Present.
Mr. Andrew Clark.
Here.
Ms. Sharon Gary Smith. I know I saw her beautiful face here. Maybe she's having technical difficulties. Ms. Leslie Goodlow,
Present.
Ms. Estelle Love Levaspierre,
Here.
Mr. Kevin Modica,
Present.
Mr. John Washington, I see you smiling. I can't hear you.
I'm still laughing. I'm still laughing at the callers. That's all right. Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure others will be joining us as we move along. I'm going to turn it over now to our project director, Ms. Megan Channel.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for being here this evening and for the reschedule to tonight. I have one update just related to project design, really as a follow-up to feedback that we've received from the community as well as Portland Public Schools over the past few years, in fact, and wanted to let you know that our team is starting to evaluate a design option that is shifting the northern part of the project, so the northern segment of I-5 that fronts Harriet Tubman Middle School, looking at an option that would move the highway improvements to the west instead of to the east, really to explore an option that does not move I-5 any closer to Harriet Tubman Middle School to minimize the technical and then construction concerns there. And exploring this option would also be responsive to a number of comments that I feel like we have heard from this committee specifically as well around Harriet Tubman Middle School and community concerns just around the proximity of the project to that site. So we're just kicking this off in the early phases of the evaluation. We're reaching out to the impacted properties and parties, coordinating with Portland Public Schools, as well as a business that is just to the west of I-5 in that location, Chin Chin Foods, and having active conversations there just to understand how this alternative alignment might have an effect on their property. So again, wanted you to hear this as we're kicking this off. We anticipate having more information for you in late May and starting some more robust discussions around this, likely some broader community conversations as well. This work we're gonna remain focused on between now and about mid-July. And so our A&E, our architectural and engineering design team, so Steve Drahota, who you have seen at prior meetings, he'll be joining us again just to understand what this alternative concept will be and working with you on kind of the recommended approach moving forward. So wanted you to hear that design update first, really before we get going in earnest on that. And I am happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Clark, I see your hand.
When you're doing project updates, it's helpful for me, at least from a design perspective, if you can put those updates on the screen as you're talking through them. I know we're going to talk to them later, but it's helpful to kind of reiterate that and point out the updates. That's it.
Absolutely. We can do better with that next time, Andrew. We'll make sure to have some images associated with that.
Awesome. And we'll give opportunity if we need to more questions. Next slide, please. I would love to introduce Janelle Bell and Miss Amber Ontiveros, who will be giving us an update in regards to the Community Oversight Advisory Committee.
Good evening, everyone. This is Amber Ontiveros. Unfortunately, Janelle couldn't join us this evening, but I'll be providing the update for him. So I am the DBE OJT technical lead for the project. I just wanted to give you a brief update with regard to the CMGC and some of the work that they are doing with the COAC, the Community Oversight Advisory Committee. So over the last several months, the CMGC has submitted their diversity plan, which is essentially, it's like a roadmap for how they're going to implement their DBE and their workforce program. And what they've been laying out in the past few months is just a portion, and then they will be providing other portions and of the components of that plan. So they began with the DBE and the subcontracting plan. And the last meeting, they discussed basically like the science or the technical approach for how they're going to be subcontracting some of that work. And so the range of DBE opportunities right now, if you recall, this is a CMGC, which means there are various design milestones. And at this percent design, which is we're at 20% design, the range is between 145 and $175 million. And the other thing is they've indicated that will be between 3 and 5 mini CMGCs, which are priming opportunities that also include technical assistance components for those mini CMGCs. And the other thing is soon in the coming months, we will also be talking about the workforce program, which the specification, if you can see, it includes an apprenticeship program with diversity targets of 14% female and 25% minority male. And that's my update for now. I will be back and or Janelle will give an update. I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Clark, do you have one?
No, I don't. Actually, that was sorry.
Okay.
I would love, Amber, if you would just clarify for those, because we have a lot of acronyms and initials. Yes. Just to clarify, you mentioned the CMGC. Currently, yes. If you would just reiterate who our CMGC team is, what that makeup is, and then briefly explain the ideal behind the mini CMGCs.
Yes, that's great. Okay, so let me start by explaining the concept of CMGC. So there are different, as you know, there are different types of procurement methods that an agency like ODOT can use in procuring a prime contractor or construction contractor. In this case, ODOT chose to use what's called CMGC. So the CM stands for construction manager. The GC stands for general contractor. So earlier, Megan identified Steve Drahota, who is on this call. The company that he works for is HDR, which is an engineering firm. So the idea behind CMGC is you take the design team, which is HDR, and then you take the general contracting team, and by bringing those two teams together, you can design and construct and bring the best value and cost to the project. Okay, so what does that have to do with the DBE program? So CMGC is one of the most innovative methods in the country, and we've seen here in Portland for using and for creating opportunities for disadvantaged business enterprises. And for those of you that don't know what a DBE is, it's a federal term for a firm that is either owned by a minority, a person of color, or a woman. Okay, so back to the other question that Miss Erica asked, which is, what does that have to do with mini CMGC? So the team in this case is the CMGC, or the general contractor, is comprised of Hamilton Sunt, which is a joint venture, and then they have in association with Raymore Construction, which is a local Black-owned construction firm that works, does other projects across the state, including some significant projects with TriMet. Now, what this project includes is mini CMGCs, which allows contractors, DBEs, to become primes, to build their capacity to become priming work. That's what the idea is behind a mini CMGC.
So, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to make
Sorry.
we're all of those initials that we're making sure to break those down. That's all right, Andrew. Go ahead with Andrew.
The CMGC is basically not to exceed in terms of budget. Like, you have a budget cap, and then your 20% works within that budget cap. Is that what you're talking about, Amber?
So can you tease that question out a little bit more for me, pretty please?
So if I want to put a project out there, right, and I say you have this amount of money to spend, right? Let's just say, right, or 10 million or whatever it is, and we cannot exceed that amount. So you put a contract in place legally in terms of your CMGC that doesn't exceed that amount within that contract. So I'm trying to get to where the 20% comes in. It's a not to exceed within the larger project value.
Oh, I get what you're saying. So you mean the 20% design?
Yes. So,
yeah.
Well, 20% of the CMGC agreed upon contract.
Yeah. Megan, I think I need to clarify.
Right. Amber, just a moment. I want to make sure, Andrew, that are you asking in regards to the DBE goal and the percentage? Because I know Amber gave a figure of a range that would potentially be going to Black and brown firms. Is that the percentage you're referring to?
I'm referring to is within the range of the DBE goal.
Okay.
What is that percentage once it's capped, right? So it can slide between that, at least if I'm looking at it right, if I'm listening to it right.
Yeah. So at this particular point in time, they have developed an analysis that has a range of opportunities, and it's an initial range, and they will be refining that at the various design milestones. So right now, they only have a tiny bit of information, which is 20% information at this point, and it could change and go up depending on.
That's because we're not into construction documents. We're not further along enough to tighten up that range.
That's correct, sir. That's correct.
Yeah. So just to clarify, the 18 to 22% DBE range is what we have identified now at this early phase in the project. As the work packages are identified, and to your point, Andrew, as we go into those construction contracts for either the early work packages or the main packages, and have more design developed for those, then we'll be setting the specific targets for those work packages with the acknowledgement that the goal for the whole project should be within the 18 to 22% range.
You can track that between each phase. We're in conceptual now. We're going to be in schematics later and design development. You can keep tracking that throughout that phase, and we'll be here to be able to participate in that.
Yep, absolutely.
Indeed, and there's a whole, the Community Oversight Advisory Committee is specifically functioning in the role now to hold the CMGC and the project accountable to those DBE and workforce goals. So there is a arm of the community, if you will, the HAAB and the COAC working together to make sure that we are meeting those workforce goals. And we are looking for an opportunity to be able to have a joint conversation between those groups And there's additional information to Andrew that we can share with you in regards to that. Mr. Washington, I see your hand.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you unpack that last one for me? Can you go back to that last slide? And that last one on the slide about building a pipeline? I can't see it now. That last one about the COAC recommends a pipeline building immediately to maximize economic investment, including apprenticeship and overall workforce diversity targets. Can you unpack that a little bit for me? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, Mr. Washington, so the COAC, as well as other community leaders, made recommendations to ODOT with regard to the targets for workforce. And in this case, it's 14% female and 25% minority male. In other words, so there's one thing about what are the firms or DBEs. There's another thing about the workers who are working for those firms. And so these targets are, the COAC has said, CMGC, we want you to meet these targets around the workforce participation of females and minority males. That's what that means.
Okay, and have you seen any studies or anything that have effectively hit this target in the state of Oregon?
This particular target is a standard target that most agencies utilize. Yes, and I believe that is why the COAC. Sorry, we're moving. I believe that is why the COAC recommended this.
Okay, I'll circle back to this one.
Thank you, sir.
It's been for right now.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Leslie, I do see your hand. I want to make sure, because we're just a bit behind in the schedule, that we're moving expeditiously. So I don't want to ignore your question. If you don't mind writing that down for me, I would appreciate it, and I'll find an opportunity to come back to you. Dr. Holt, if you would give us just a brief update so that I can get the ICA team forward, I would appreciate it.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Holt and part of the Tri-Excellence team, and facilitate the Executive Steering Committee. I'll be extremely brief in relationship to the Executive Steering Committee. I think there are two things that are pertinent for the Historic Albina Advisory Board. But before I say that, I want to say thank you for those of you who raised your voice and articulated what you had articulated tonight. The reason why we spent the energy to put together the Historic Albina Advisory Board was for this very reason, to pull together people who have lived experience in the arena, and to pull together people who are committed to the kinds of principles and the kinds of outcomes that we are working towards. So thank you very much for lifting your voice. Not that you need the exhortation and or the encouragement, but I certainly want to say that what you did is the reason why we asked you to come into this space. So thank you very much. Now, in relationship to the Executive Steering Committee, we met yesterday, what now seems like a long time ago. What is essential around the Executive Steering Committee for your purposes is that we are working on a joint committee meeting, that we're working to bring the Executive Steering Committee together with the Historic Albina Advisory Board to have some, to begin the process of creating symbiosis, connectivity, collective work around the project as we move toward recommendation. We want to establish what is a seamless sense of connectivity so that there's no pitting one hand against the other, so that both groups have an opportunity to have dialogue and thoughtful discussion around the information that's being presented, because ultimately the recommendation is going to come from the Executive Steering Committee to the Oregon Transportation Commission. So that's what we are working on, as well as bringing the Community Oversight Advisory Committee together. So that's what you can anticipate. You'll be hearing more about that. That's my update.
Thanks, Dr. Holt. I want to share two things briefly before I bring Ms. Gina Willie before you all. The project branding options, we are going to be sending the HAAB members a survey where you'll have an opportunity to spend some time to take in the branding designs and provide your feedback in that manner. So we want to make sure that you're aware of that. We've had some conversations with you. Also, I want to say to the ICA team, we value what you bring to us today. Those of you who have the opportunity, we've taken some time into their presentation. I hope that you have the opportunity. I know Ms. Leslie has a previous commitment and will be leaving us shortly, but others, if you can stay, we want to make sure we might have a few moments over to make sure that we can adequately dive in to the discussion and get your feedback on some very important items. So with that, to the next slide, please. Next slide.
Erica, I think we've had a mix up with slides. These are the ones that show the shift with Tubman. So just really quickly, Andrew, to your point, ask and you shall receive. Here is an image that shows the area that I was talking about in terms of the alignment shift that we are starting to explore. So instead of shifting to the east towards Harriet Tubman Middle School, so if you go one slide forward, there you go. Instead of what we have currently, where the 26-foot shift would go towards Harriet Tubman Middle School, the alternative that we are looking at in the next slide would actually shift the proposed improvements to the west. So that's the alignment shift that we're currently exploring.
Thank you, Megan, for highlighting that. Andrew, that was provided to you in the email I sent to you today. So if you have additional thoughts or questions, please make sure you email me. I appreciate that update, Megan, as well. If you'll move to the next slide for me, please. And to Ms. Gina Woolley, thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Appreciate it. Good evening, HAAB members. Thank you so much for allowing us time on your agenda tonight. As many of you know, my name is Gina Woolley, and I'm the ICA team's community engagement leader and facilitator. So today we hope to understand how you feel that highway covers can best facilitate the building of a revitalized neighborhood in the Albina Rose Quarter area that delivers restorative justice benefits to the Black historic Albina community. So we're going to share with you 5 design concepts. These are not concepts, they're concepts we've done preliminary feasibility on. The next step is to do more detailed feasibility on a few of these. But we want to understand what your preferences are for how all the facilities that need to be accommodated in this area, the freeway facilities, the multimodal facilities, and then, opportunities for the community to build wealth, health, and cohesion can best be accommodated in the area and can best be organized to maximize community wealth, health, and cohesion for the Black historic community. So can we go to the next slide? This is our agenda for this evening. We will be pressing it. We'll be, because we are behind in terms of this. So hopefully we'll have enough time to have a robust discussion and really hear back from you how you feel and to answer your questions about these. So with that, can we go to I would like to turn this over and we'd like to get started. I'd like to turn the mic over to my teammate, Nolan Leinhart, to just remind you what the ICA's purpose is and where we are in our process and what our charge is. Nolan, can you?
Thanks, Gina. I'll be really quick because all of you have seen this graphic a few times, but it's just reiterating that our process is geared around 3 work sessions The first was in the end of February, which was listening and assessing the community's vision so that we could generate concepts, design concepts, development concepts, which you'll see tonight. The idea is that during this work session, we are soliciting feedback about those concepts from you, from the Executive Steering Committee, from participants in our community work sessions that will help us to refine those, improve upon those for what we will show in work session 3, which is a final set of concepts. We will also get your feedback, and those will roll into and inform an Executive Steering Committee recommendation to the Oregon Transportation Commission in July. Next slide. Just to remind you, what is the basic parameters of the scenarios that we'll be developing. We will be evaluating the base case, which is the assumptions in the NEPA environmental assessment. We will also be creating one scenario that is limited to the assumptions in the environmental assessment area potential impact. Another one which may not, may have other characteristics that are outside of that area of potential impact. And then a third scenario determined by the Executive Steering Committee with input from all the sources that we're talking with that may do something else. It may fall into one of those categories or not. So this is the range of ideas we'll be exploring. You'll see a little bit of that tonight and even more at work session 3.
Thanks, Nolan. And so with that, what I'd like to do, if we could go to the next slide, is I'd just like to remind you in work session 1, which we conducted a workshop with you, we really wanted to understand how highway covers could support the community's vision for neighborhood revitalization and provide restorative justice for the Black historic Albina community. So in work session 1, we had 2 community workshops. We had a 2-week open house. We had a workshop with this group. We had a workshop with the ESC, and we had a workshop with the COAC. Next slide, please. In our what we came out of those workshops with were programming priorities, things that the community felt could help provide restorative community. And we ended up with, we identified the top 10 programming ideas that were, and governance ideas that we heard. And I'm just going to quickly just refresh your mind so that when we go to showing you and reviewing with you the 5 scenarios tonight, you understand where some of the ideas for the type of programming that helped inform our thinking about how those concepts are organized came from. So next slide. So we had 6 of the top ideas were related to community wealth. There was a notion about the Black community owning and controlling developable land that could be held in a land trust or some other entity for a long-term development of a planned community in this area. There was the interest in an affordable rental and ownership business spaces. Next slide, please. There was a lot of interest in a food sovereignty center that relates to the Black farming movement that's going on in the Portland metro area with a local market for fresh food. This is a growing industry and could provide jobs. There was the notion for permanently affordable rental and ownership housing. Next. There was interest in a job training and development center and affordable childcare and an affordable childcare and development center that would be located in the area. And then there were 2 items, next slide please, that were related to community health, which one was to develop a cultural health and wellness center that would offer a variety of programs and health generation opportunities to folks that lived in the area. And then there was the notion of creating a large accessible outdoor community gathering space for festivals, events, and recreation. And then we had 2 that were related to community cohesion. There was a great deal of interest. One of the ideas that was got the most number of votes and mentions was to create a Black cultural center that could showcase experiences and education around Black food, Black art, and Black history in the Portland area, and then to develop public realm aesthetics and art installations that reflect Black culture and art in the area. So with that, I think that one of the things that clearly that came out of our work session was the notion that governance is a really important aspect of any of the scenarios that we develop. How are we going to structure governance that will allow the community to actually move forward? If it had land, if the land was granted from the covers and around the area from that came out of the ODOT project, how would that land be developed and managed over the long term? So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Olivia, and she's going to talk to you about how we're beginning to shape up the notion about governance and speak to it in relationship to the scenarios that we will put forth in the next phase of our project. Olivia?
I'm talking on mute. Thank you so much, Gina. Sorry about that. Thank you everyone for sharing your time tonight with us. We really appreciate it. And I think that these next few slides will also start to tee up the answers to the questions that I just saw popping up in the chat. Thank you so much for that question. I know it's a really important element of thinking about how to deliver benefit for the community through this project. So we can go to the next slide. The finance and governance element of this work starts by trying to define the right governance structure to oversee this project as it is delivered, as community benefits are delivered or opportunities to deliver them are created, and then for the long term. So this is a structure that needs to change and evolve, but will also stay with the project as community members and as the local community develops and begins to use this space. So to do that, we follow a four-step process. The first is about listening to the community's priorities, understanding what the community's vision is or what community stakeholder visions are for what can happen on the highway covers, which Gina just talked through. And then using precedent analysis and best practices from our work across the country and also throughout the region, we identify the roles and responsibilities required to deliver on those priorities and think about the types of entities that can fulfill those roles. So Gina had mentioned that we heard from the community a desire for control and use of land delivered as part of the highway covers. That often aligns with something like a community land trust, a CLT, or a community development corporation, a CDC. So we're thinking about those kinds of entities as well as others. And then we start to look for whether those entities already exist in and around Portland, and particularly in this area of Portland, so that this is really a governance structure that grows from the community and from the stakeholders who are most invested in this area already, but also have the best knowledge of how to deliver these benefits. And we think about what else needs to be created and what partnerships might need to be formed to make this project as successful as possible. We can go to the next slide. In identifying the roles and responsibilities of a governing entity, or really a network of entities, we've identified that the governance structure here needs to be flexible enough to evolve and change over the course of the project and to work with various partner entities as the project evolves. I'll talk more specifically about that on the next slide. Second, we've identified that the governance structure needs to have the ability either to already have or to build and maintain community trust and represent community vision. We know that the Black historic Albina community in Portland is not a monolithic community or has a monolithic idea. And so this needs to be an entity or network of entities that can represent the different parts of the community's vision and deliver on different kinds of benefits that might be most of interest. It needs to have the authority to enter into agreements related to the delivery of community benefits, So this is, and related to the next bullet about having the legal ability and technical capacity to own or lease land and hold or spend funds to deliver on the community's priorities. So just dipping a toe into part of the answer to the question that I saw Leslie posted in the chat. The entity needs to have the authority, that's the legal authority, as well as the trust of the community to enter into agreements around delivering benefits, which means it can do things like sign leases, own space, stand up programs, but also to hold and spend funds, meaning that it can be the recipient of grant funding, philanthropic funding. It can pursue financing, both market rate as well as mission focused financing to deliver on priorities, everything from development to different types of programs. And it also needs to have accountability, both to community stakeholders, but also to its government partners, often demonstrated by regular reporting out about how it's spending funds, how it's making progress toward goals, et cetera. We can go on to the next slide. So this is just a hypothetical illustration of how the governance entity could evolve over time. During the Rose Quarter Improvement Project's planning stages, so now and throughout the rest of planning, the entity might act as a community steering committee. And this could be formed from some of the existing committees and existing members of the community who are involved in shaping this process now, and could involve new voices as appropriate. This committee would interact regularly with ODOT and other project partners as the project moves toward implementation, and set clear project goals and agreements for accountability. Immediately after construction, or really during construction as the highway covers are delivered, this might morph into or partner with a community development corporation or a community land trust that could take ownership or lease of space on the highway covers or land on terra firma that's made available by ODOT, or really by the implementation of this project, and could begin planning for community-focused development initiatives. And throughout ongoing operations, this might be continuing as a CDC, a community development corporation. It might be a conservancy. It might be multiple mission-specific nonprofit partners who champion and or execute projects and programs, including real estate development, say of affordable housing, commercial space, all kinds of uses, as well as standing up programs around job training, reskilling workers, food production programming, maintaining open space and recreational space, et cetera. We can go to the next slide. And I want to introduce this concept before we leave this section that we'll talk about more in our discussion of how value is delivered through this project. And we're thinking about sort of a spectrum of the way benefits can be delivered to the community. On one end, having physical assets and land, and on the other, through dedicated funding and technical support to move toward delivering community priorities. These aren't mutually exclusive. There's a lot of space in this spectrum where we could land. But one of the things that we will ask you to think about this evening is about how benefits can be delivered through the different scenarios we're sharing, and whether there is a preference for, or the weight you put on benefits being delivered through physical assets or benefits being delivered through dedicated funding and technical support. This doesn't change the governance structure that we would recommend. It might change some of the entities that are appropriate within that, but any governance structure would need to have that capacity, legitimacy, and trust of community stakeholders to successfully move the project forward. Next slide. And I will turn it back to Charles.
Thank you, Olivia. My name is Charles Kelly. I'm principal at CGF Architects, and my colleagues and I are now going to share with you the development concepts that we have created to investigate the elements of a restorative neighborhood that can be provided to improve, that you can consider, that, and that can be recommended to the OTC to make improvements on the Rose Quarter Improvement Project as we've been asked to do. Next slide. What we can say about this neighborhood is that it's at the intersection of the Broadway Corridor Couplet and the Williams-Vancouver Couplet. Both those corridors are important, have been historic service areas for the historic Albina community. That the intersection is at the next slide. You'll see that that node or that intersection of those two corridors, if you can go to the next slide, thank you, is precisely where the highway covers that we're considering today, where it is, and that many of those connections that can reconnect those corridors here to form a node as a more restorative community, restorative neighborhood, or give you the greatest potential for restorative outcomes that are imagined by the ESC and the community that we've talked to in work session 1. Next slide. One of the things that as an ICA, as an independent cover assessment team, is that we were using we developed a tool called the Development Assessment Framework that allows us to evaluate the concepts for their potential to provide restorative outcomes. It is based on the ESC's, the Executive Steering Committee's value statement, which identified those things that needed to improve, outcomes that needed to be improved in the Rose Quarter Improvement Project. They have been, as we've been developing this framework, we have amended it to include what we have heard from the community in work session 1. And this it's not a scoring system, but it's a way of helping to understand the performance of each of the concepts you will see as it relates to achieving that goal. More deeply, you can go to our online open house and see the backup materials under each scheme and under each of these criteria to get more deeper understanding of how they scored. But for the moment, it's just a guide for us to understand the relative ability of this concept to achieve that larger potential. When you see a circle with these multicolored circles under the development assessment framework represent how well we're doing on community health. If it's empty, it's considered to be doing well or good. If it's half full, it's considered to be doing better. And if it's full, it's considered to be doing best in its achievement of those outcomes. So be looking for that. It's looking at the community wealth, the community health, the community cohesion, and the mobility that's achieved in each one of those concepts. To the right, or excuse me, to the left, during our technical assessment and moving the elements around in each concept, there was a relative degree of benefit that was provided by moving elements around in each urban design concept or each concept. There was a relative challenge, and there was a potential feasibility of moving those concepts forward that we also measured and tried to understand as we were working on the project. Next slide. I think I mentioned that one of our top goals was to see how we could configure moving the elements, configure a concept and moving the elements of such as ramp terminals, street classifications, open space, and building program. There were 4 big moves that gave us really the biggest differential in scoring in the development assessment framework. Those 4 things are maximizing to the degree that we could maximize land area that created or designated for community control and use was a significant indicator or factor in the configuration of the elements. Creating street edges that foster active street frontages and ground level uses comparable to the best places in Portland, the most active vital commercial areas in Portland. Creating more pedestrian and bike-friendly streets that could separate traffic going to ramp terminals from the neighborhood that could be an active and open, and open to the street and safe for people to use that neighborhood, and then reducing air and noise pollution as a consequence of the design of the highway covers. Next slide. So what you'll see in these studies that we did is we kept many things the same as we were moving the elements around in the concepts. So the location of ramp terminals and classification streets were sort of the main elements we're moving around, but we tried to keep the zoning and density we tried to use the same density and height requirements for each. We used typical buildings and building systems that are common in the market here locally. We looked at how open spaces could be conducive to open space activities and the use of the outdoors. And finally, assuming efficiencies that we're building, either we're building on the lid or building off the lid. There are some efficiencies for building on the lid that are not present. We're building on just terra firma and vice versa and you'll hear my colleagues talk more about the difference for building on a cover and building on terra firma around the cover. Well, with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kate Brooks, who's our urban designer, who will go through the elements of each concept.
Thanks, Charles. Really excited to be here with you all tonight and share our design ideas. As Gina said earlier, and Charles mentioned, we have 5 design concepts that we're going to share with you in addition to the EA. And these concepts essentially look at different arrangements of streets and ramps, which provide various shapes and sizes of development parcels. So as Charles said, we looked at sort of 4 big ideas to generate these concepts, but really with the community's priorities driving these studies. Next slide.
Before you move forward, just one moment. I just want to make sure I acknowledge HAAB members. I realize this is a ton of information. If you would please jot down your questions, we'll be happy to go back in our discussion period. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the EA or the environmental assessment. To orient everyone to the graphics, the highway is in the big gray arrow in the middle of the drawing. The ramps are shown in red. The major and minor streets are shown as the black lines. We're going to show development parcels in a black outline with a gray fill. And these are going to vary in each scheme as we look at how open space and buildings can be configured. And we're showing an area of focus that relates to the development theme that's going to be in a yellow highlight, which isn't on this particular drawing, but I'll speak to that in others. So the major elements of the EA are 2 covers with open space. This design improves the east-west connectivity with the Hancock to Dixon crossing and the Clackamas pedestrian crossing, both shown there with the number 2. And it creates more pedestrian and bicycle friendly environment, especially the movement through the cover's open space. Another thing to note is that this design proposes to remove the north-south connection of Flint across the highway. We are also showing the development assessment framework evaluation, as Charles mentioned. This is a tool we're using to evaluate how well these concepts do as they relate to the community outcomes we've listed under wealth, health, cohesion, and mobility. I'm going to speak to them as low, medium, and high. So because the EA doesn't provide much development, this is scoring low for wealth and health. And while there's a large amount of green space, the cohesion evaluation is medium to allow for public gathering and community cohesion. But this also scores medium on mobility as it's an improvement to the existing condition while providing additional east-west connections. So again, this is our base case. We know that the 20% design is further along and is slightly different, but all of our other design concepts are evaluated against this design. Next. Okay, concept 1. This makes some slight modifications to the EA. So this is proposing moving or shifting slightly the southbound off-ramp slightly east, hugging the highway as much as it can, which is shown there at the number 1. So by moving this ramp over, it creates a larger parcel to the west, which is shown there at the number 2. And, you know, because these ramps are still really creating a barrier to the development that we're showing on Vancouver and Williams with less access and less development potential, the focus area, that yellow area I talked about, is really supported more on Flint and Broadway. So unlike the EA, we're trying to maximize the development potential on and around the cover. So you can see those dark gray areas as potential building footprints, which does increase the ability to provide development for community wealth. There's also opportunity for community cohesion, but because the ramps surround the development sites, we're still evaluating this scheme as low for community health. Next. Concept 2, please. There we go. So concept 2 explores moving the southbound off-ramp over to align with Flint and replace Flint, which is shown there at the number 1. This also changes the alignment of Hancock across the freeway going straight, as opposed to aligning with Dixon, like was shown in the EA. So this does restore part of the street grid, though we do lose the capacity and the connection of Flint for street traffic in this area. Because the ramps are now moved to either side of the cover development, that really focuses the energy in toward Vancouver. And we have an opportunity here to create like a signature main street that can connect all the way up to the north and northeast neighborhoods and down to the Rose Quarter. So as we're providing more contiguous sites here with the ability to provide both development and supporting open space, all of the valuation circles are now rated up to medium. Next. Okay, concept 3. This explores merging Vancouver and Flint across the highway shown at the number 1. This simplifies the traffic connections at the existing southbound off-ramp because Vancouver no longer extends all the way south to Broadway. So the northbound on-ramp is being proposed to move to North Hancock, shown at 2. So these ramps and street configurations now open up a large development parcel between Flint and Williams that can be utilized for a number of different programs that Gina reviewed earlier. The southbound off-ramp, though, still cuts through the site. You can see it kind of poking out there out of the cover. So we're seeing more focus and access and energy on Flint and Broadway. On this central parcel, we're showing open space with some building footprints that can support Flint and provide connections to other amenities in the neighborhood. This is just an example of development within this parcel. There's many different ways it can be configured. So while we have a large parcel size that can provide more opportunities for community wealth, health, and cohesion, we still have these ramps in between and surrounding the development. So we're still scoring medium on all of the development assessment framework. Okay, next. Okay, so similar to the previous design idea, this study merges Vancouver and Flint across the highway. However, this concept proposes moving all of the interchange ramps to the south of Weidler. And so this provides a large development parcel, again, between Flint and Williams. And this particular scheme shows a linear park on the covers, or a cover, that is supported by buildings around it. There's a lot of opportunity in this option for cultural program, active ground floor program, business space, residential space, and many different community-oriented activities. You can see the yellow highlighted area. This is a sort of centrally focused concept on and around the cover. And because we no longer have the freeway interchange impacts in this space, it opens up all kinds of opportunity for community wealth, health, and cohesion programs. And the mobility experience for peds and bikes increases, so it scores high on all. Next. So this is concept 5. We're calling this restore the grid. This is also maximizing the amount of land on and around the cover by, again, removing the existing on and off ramps and relocating them to the south. But instead of a large parcel like the previous design, this focuses on restoring the street grid within the existing street network. So utilizing Flint, Vancouver, and Williams, and extending Hancock across the highway. This allows for consistent block sizes for development with a lot of access and continuity within the existing street network. This concept is also providing the most amount of land area in all of the schemes. So there's a big opportunity to provide most, if not all, of the community's program and vision. So again, this is scoring high for all of the development assessment framework circles. I'm going to hand it back over to Charles.
Thank you. In consideration of making a recommendation to the OTC, we feel that these concepts give sort of a view on the degree, on a kind of a scale degree of 5 being able to move, really make a contribution, a very significant long-term contribution to creating a restorative neighborhood. And then what we can do with you and the community is understand how do we get there, and what are the elements that we can use that help us, respect the goals of the project in its desire to meet the schedule, to address the cost questions, and understand not necessarily the trade-offs to the schedule, but what are the trade-offs that we can do technically in each element that allows the project to move forward and meet its goals, and bring partners on to support the governance structure that Olivia mentioned, the outcomes that Gina mentioned, by simply considering in detail what we can recommend to the OTC to make catalyze a situation that gives the greatest potential for a restorative neighborhood. So what I'd like to do is, we're looking at this spectrum. We want you to understand more deeply what this spectrum is from concept 1 to concept 5. My colleague Josh will give you kind of an insight into why it's important to see this spectrum and what some of the ideas and choices are that you can weigh in on in this process.
Thank you, Charles, and good evening, everyone. So as Charles mentioned, we're going to spend a little time diving into the 2 ends of the spectrum, so concept 1 and concept 5. These are not the solution, but they are just kind of what is possible within the canvas that is created by the ramps and the street configurations. And so starting with number 1, as Kate mentioned before, what you'll really see between 1 and 5 is really if we focus the energy of attention along Vancouver and Williams, and then with the ramps located there versus an option 5 where we relocate the ramps to the south. And so so with the ramps in the center along Vancouver and Williams in option 1, it really stresses a lot of the energy along Flint and Broadway Street. So next slide. And so just to spend a little bit of time orienting everybody as we go from those 2D plans to the 3D, on the right side is the Moda Center. And the gray line going through the center is I-5. To the left is looking northbound, and to the right is looking southbound. You can also see Vancouver, Williams, what would be Flint Street is located there, and then Broadway and Weiler coming off the page to the right side. And the yellow that was mentioned on the call earlier is the residential multi-dwelling. So this, as Gina mentioned earlier, is ownership, rental, also affordable opportunities. And the blue is commercial mixed use. This could also have healthcare. And the red, the commercial, is this really notion of creating those strong active streets that Charles mentioned. So mixture of retail services, flexibility for small and large businesses to thrive and to grow and to create a community. And then in the center, this magenta pink color is
about Rockstar Parking.
So that in the center really is a lot of those great programs that we heard from the community and that Gina mentioned earlier. So food markets, food halls, multi-purpose spaces, job creation, job education, childcare. With this option, we really wanted to focus that energy in the center of the space. But with the kind of the notion of the freeway on and off ramps in the center along Vancouver and Williams, we really didn't think that this area kind of had the right, the opportunity to thrive as an open space. We really began to look at these as interior spaces, but really strong interior spaces that has a lot of flexibility and can create a community identity. And one of those that you can see on the bottom left is the August Wilson Center in Pittsburgh that really has a strong urban edge and focus. And that can really have a strong presence along Broadway and then really strives looking kind of north-south through this district. On the left side, we began to look at a residential, really creating a strong residential community along Flint Street. And then along Broadway and Weiler, really looking at some mixed use development. There is opportunity as we go further to the east along Broadway that you can begin to maximize the height if that is so desired. And then from here, we'll go to the next one, but really think about what it's like in this center space, and that's the real difference between 1 and 5. Next, please. So as Kate mentioned earlier, really by moving the ramps further to the south, it really creates the opportunity to maximize the development within the center of this. And this option here, 5, as we can talk about restoring the grid, really creates the opportunity to create strong streets along Flint, Vancouver, Williams, Hancock, and Broadway Street. And this really gives the opportunity to really restore a community that was really divided by I-5. And so we'll begin to look at this as 3D, and then what are some of those possibilities within that. So the next slide. So on the far right, you can see what those interstates moved. But as I mentioned before, as we begin to really focus on the center here, the difference between 1 and 5. In this 1 and 5, we began to take those elements that we had all clustered together and really spread them apart and really begin to stretch them as these series of pearls wrapped along the lid. This allows for this opportunity of experiences along Vancouver, Williams, and Flint. It can also have the opportunity for these spaces not to only be interior, but also to be exterior. So it still has all the events that we talked about in 1, but it also allows for that food market not only to be inside, but also to be outside in the great days in Portland. Also places for events to happen outside, strong active streets, places for the community to come and play and thrive, especially as we get further away from the ramps. And then also like a great example is in Atlanta with the cultural center. It allows for these buildings to really maybe have their own identity, but to be of the time and of the place of Portland and to really fit in within this neighborhood. But like number 1, the density in the program typologies that we're showing is really key to create an active neighborhood. So a mixture of housing of all types, office, medical, health and wellness buildings, but then also really active street fronts. So looking at active uses, retail, building services that can not only have strong street presences, but also the potential to thrive within an open space within the community. I could go on forever, but we really want to hear some great feedback and discussion from you all. So I will pass it back and leave it at that.
So, as promised, I want to first see if there are questions about the material before. These are the 2 questions that we want to talk with you about, spend some time talking with you about. We can go back into the slide deck if you've taken notes, but I know I saw Kevin's question in the chat, which was about density of housing. And so what I would like is, I'd just like for the design team to speak to the massing diagrams, and that these are conceptual, and they're really talking about what the maximum development could be on each of those sites. So Josh or Kate, do you guys want to speak to that? Or even Stephen? I know Stephen's in the audience. I mean, is on the call.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Josh to share like the number of stories of height, because I think there's not everyone's understanding the scale of the 3D drawing. So just give a couple of examples, Josh, of which buildings and how tall, how many stories they are.
But I just want to make sure that people understand that that what we're showing here is the maximum allowed by the zoning on these sites.
Yep.
Thank you.
That they don't have to be built to this scale.
Thank you, Gina.
You know, if
That's
the
important.
community controlled this land, they would be able to essentially decide how and what type of programming they wanted in each of these spaces relative to the zoning. What we've simply done is tried to be responsive and show that many of the community's programming desires could be accommodated in these, you know, and how they could be accommodated in these schemes. But they're purely schematic, and you could build 2 stories or 5 stories, you know, but you can speak to the maximum, you know, just speak a little bit about what the maximum densities are allowed in each of these programming areas.
No, that's great. So we definitely looked at it under the lens that Gina mentioned, as far as maximizing the development versus really beginning to look at the right sizing based on the feedback that we'll get from all these series of workshops and meeting with the community. So there's a couple of things somewhere around this line that I'm drawing right here is there's an FAR of 3:1 versus below that is 4:1. What we're looking at is heights also around 65 to 75 feet, kind of in this zone. And then there's potential to go up to 125 with bonuses in these sites. So we're looking at is really a kind of a mixture of sort of on the lid, lower building heights between 2 and 4 stories. And then as we get on actual terra firma, trying to maximize the height for this study, which is also kind of an interesting thing because it really can give the opportunity for a mixture of densities, scales, and kind of create a unique character versus when everything's at the same datum or height line. So that's really what we're looking at here is around 65 feet in these buildings. This one here can actually go up to 100. These could go up to 125. And then
Josh,
the rest is around 65.
Can you explain what people may not know how many stories that is? You know,
okay,
approximately.
Yep.
You know,
so if it's so with this, we were looking at residential at about 10 feet floor to floor, maybe around a 15-foot first floor. So around 6. If it was a 65-foot building, that would be about 6 stories. If I'm speaking correctly on the fly, when we're looking at these blue buildings, which could be commercial office space, or it could even be medical office. Depending on the floor size, we look at something around 13.5 to 15 feet. Smaller floor plates that have better access to daylight, you can go a little bit lower. Once you get to bigger floor plates, sometimes you might maximize the height to get better daylight penetration through the building. So with a 125-foot building, if it was residential, that would be between maybe around 11 stories, you know, give or take, based on some of the math. And then office would be a little bit less than that, so maybe around 8 or 9.
So Nolan, can you add your comment, and then I want to get to any of the HAAB members' comments.
Sure. Mr. Modica also asked, you know, why didn't we show single family houses or duplexes? And I think the reason is that the zoning allows for higher densities. And so we wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to show as many housing units, be those units for, you know, African-American community members to own or units for them to lease. But this block just to the right of bullet 5 there on the map. That's about a half block. That could contain, 10 units if they're duplexes, or that could contain, 100 units if it was in a building of the size that's shown. So that was where we leaned. And obviously, if the folks feel differently, we'd love to hear that feedback.
I'd
Can
like
I
to
just
move
add
to Mr.
quickly?
Washington. After Kate, after you give your comment, I just want to make sure, because Mr. Washington has been waiting patiently for some time.
Just quickly, I wanted to add that the zoning in this area will not allow for single family. Just wanted to make that clarification.
All right. Does John have his, does John want to ask his comment?
Comment? Yeah, I got some comments, but I didn't necessarily want to speak before the rest of my colleagues spoke. But I don't know about them, but I got a headache. There's a lot of information that we had to receive. And, and I want to caution us just a little bit, is that I don't know about y'all, if any of y'all play cards or gamble and they talk about the turn. If y'all sitting at this table with me right now, I want you to understand that you're witnessing and being a part of the turn, okay? We are being turned. So if you don't understand what the conceptual understanding of all this information is, please step up and talk a little bit, because if you're feeling a little bit confused right now, and you should be, okay, just to my colleagues, I just want you to understand that.
John,
Mr. Washington, we lost you.
You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Were you able to hear me earlier?
We heard the first part of it. We just lost your last sentence or two.
Okay. So, so we were hearing from the community engagement part all the way up into the actual technical development examples is what's being said. But I'm a little bit concerned about how this is all being handled right about through here and through this part of it, okay? Now, if you have any history in the district, as I've heard a few of my colleagues say that we have, which leads me to this question in the communication about Williams and Vancouver. And I guess I should ask somebody, was there a connected understanding of the potential for Williams and Vancouver in this exit? Was this strategy ever contextualized or talked about prior to the development of Williams and Vancouver? Can anybody answer that for me?
Are you asking the team that?
Yes. Does anybody have any prior knowledge? Did the development of Williams and Vancouver in the district on the upper end, did they know that this I-5 widening situation would be coming 5 years prior to Vancouver and Williams being built out the way it is right now?
I think you'd have to ask ODOT that. I mean, that's not necessarily a question for the team. It would be, based on whether there was a lot of knowledge shared with the people who ended up developing land or the city. I would assume the city knew. And some of that affordable housing that's been built on Lower Williams and Vancouver, some of the land that was acquired there for affordable housing, they knew about this development. But
after the 25-year plan and the issue of when Jumptown was a conversation, was that the centralized drive of commerce and traffic was in our district was to be Broadway and MLK. The attraction and draw was to come up MLK. But now all of a sudden, we got the attraction and the draw, no matter the exits, if the exits go off onto Williams and the other street, is that destination traffic that comes off of there from all of that being built continues to feed the pockets of the dominant culture who have now occupied that space. I don't necessarily see the bigger issue of creating generational wealth. I see us feeding the traditional wealth methodologies as they're structured the way that it's set up right now. And when it comes off of Williams and it continues to drive up Williams and Vancouver. Okay, now I'm supportive of the Broadway reality and how that all works in there. But again, we have to be real contextual in understanding when we're driving and creating this, where are we driving the wealth? Okay, number one for me. And number two is, you know, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine on the way up here, and we was talking about what was the pillars of our community. If we had to talk about economic development and figure out where we needed to begin to put money at first, you know, we continue to unfold that and unfold that. And what we came down to is at the end is how those always fail is that our own people create the problems or create the space for our failure. And I'm real concerned about that. Okay, I'm even more so concerned about this community engagement piece, how you must understand that this community engagement piece is like a football. Okay, it can go any which way you want it to go. It's just data and information. Okay, so what are we really feeding here? So I want you to be a little bit, and the other thing, Erica, at least for me as a HAAB member, is that this kind of content and information, I would like it in doses. I don't want the whole wide span because it's too much we can miss, okay? And with all this information the way it is right now, a lot of us will lean in from time to time and lean out. And it's important that this information on the contextual side of it needs to be fully understood by the HAAB, okay? So I just want to caution the HAAB and my colleagues right now. I heard a sister earlier today on the committee talk to them people on the telephone and let them understand some things. I want to let these other people know that the people who are sitting on this HAAB, you just can't be running stuff by us, okay? Because it's not that we don't understand how these things work, okay? And what I'm looking at is the bigger economic development aspect of our community. Okay, you may focus and think that just by focusing on this little area is what we're talking about, but that's not really what we're talking about. Because as you unpack the situation, you're gonna find that a lot more people are gonna be benefiting from this than we are. And so it's gonna be real important for us to start taking a look at this. So I'm just a little bit concerned because I feel like I'm being handled right now and being on the turn. Okay, and it's just my thing. I may be totally off, and as usual, y'all might think I'm whatever. But understand what I'm saying. I've seen this before, okay? And I've seen in the end result, you don't really get what you want. You think you're getting because the titles are not gonna be in our name, who's gonna be holding the land asset is gonna be turned a different kind of way, all this kind of stuff. So we're in the midst of that turn right about now, so y'all need to pay attention. I would suggest you do,
So,
okay?
John, I just want to, understand what your concern is, okay? What we are representing here is the notion that a lot of this land that is developable would be held and controlled by the community. So if the gentrification issue is what you're worried about, that if we create schemes where a certain kind of development is possible, that somebody else is going to come in and take advantage of that. If the community controlled those sites, the community would decide, whatever that community governance structure was, would decide how it got developed within the confines of the zoning, you know? And so that's really what's being represented in these proposals. That's why we talked about governance in the front end, is there will have to be a governance structure with any of these scenarios to, you know, to explain how the sites that are created on and around the ramps, how the Black community benefits from those sites and can control the land and develop it for community purpose. That's the only way that the things that the community wants to see happen can happen.
But it just seems like with Black people, this always has to occur. Williams was built, 10 blocks of Williams was built in less than 2 years without a conversation, okay? And they drove Williams up the spine of the Northeast while we had our heads buried in the Trader Joe's issue on 2 acres, okay? So what I'm trying to tell you is that what I'm hearing in these conceptual plans about the community and what's needed to be able to occupy and have title and ownership in these buildings, look, I get all of the conversation that was being had, but I'm also saying to you, this is where the opportunity for us to neither get it right or we will be worked, okay, or turned, okay? And I'm telling you right now, and in this agitation phase of this and the entry level of this is where it begins to happen, okay? And I'm seeing it really clearly because there's just too much complicated information. But it's not complicated to the reality that we don't understand it. It's just red tape and depth of burial because we dig so deep down into it that in the end, we don't hold the title, somebody else holds the title. We always get surrogate realities that feed us, but we can't feed ourselves.
Yes. John, thank you so much for your passion here. I want to acknowledge that I hear you and that it has been our goal to make sure that we are presenting information that is digestible and because of the timeline that we are working with, I know the ICA team has done their best to minimize presentation, allow time for discussion and to get that information to you, but your point is well noted. And so you are heard. We thank you for that. I want to make sure that I'm helping to move the conversation forward, Gina. So if you'd indulge me, I'd love to get to Keith. I see his hand raised. Mr. Modica also, I want to get to him. I know some folks made adjustments to be here today. So Mr. Edwards, if we could take your question or comment, please.
Thank you very much, Erica. And thank you, John, for really trying to lay that out and articulate that message because typically what happens is, and the majority population tends to be linear and oftentimes are only concerned about things that they can count and measure. The Black or African-American community, we're built on relationships. That doesn't mean that we don't understand economics or that's not important to us. But I guess what I want to focus on too is that we want to make sure that we don't lose is that I saw residential and then I saw business and then I saw Black culture. I've been in America all my life and racism is the thread that runs through every fabric of America. I want Black culture to be the fabric that runs the thread that runs through every fabric of this endeavor. And no place that our children can look in future generations and not see Blackness in everything that is being done here. Because if we lose that, then we've lost it anyway. And I think that that's critical and key to what we're doing here. I want to see murals on the building that look like me. I want to see a child walking through there that can push a button and hear an audio message that gives them an explanation of who we are and what we're about. And there has to be also, and that's in every aspect. That's in education, that's housing, that's business, and all those different aspects. And we have to have that in everything that we do. And if we're not going to do that, then like John said, we've lost already. I think that just like you've got a building downtown that is really a landmark building, the Edith Green building, as far as the ecological standpoint and for the environmental standpoint as well. These buildings should have that as a focus. There's a lot of lenses that have to be looked through. But like I say, the most important lens to me is that it's a Black cultural lens that runs through everything that's being done here, every facet of what's being done here. Because if we, and a lot of times, and that's why we got the presentation we got today, is because it didn't have that thread running through that expressed the Black culture that we need in everything that we do. Because this is about us. It's not about anybody else. This is in our community and it's about us. And if it's not going to be about us, then just say that. But don't placate us and try to say that, we're going to get a message that somehow gets distracted and runs us off the cliff, and we don't get what's needed for our community and for our future generations that should be the focus of what we're trying to do here. So I just wanted to be real clear about that.
Yes, sir. Appreciate your comment. I know others may have comments. I want to, as best as I can, help us and help the ICA team of the responses or input from the HAAB that is needed. So we want you to think about a number of the programming ideas, things that we're thinking about. Again, all of that is conceptual. Those things can be continued to be flushed out. what we're looking for currently is ideals about the cover design and then those things that would need to be supported on the covers. So I know we're focusing a lot on programming, housing, the opportunities, and those things that could be developed on top of the covers. But we need the baseline of the covers before we can begin to talk about all of those other elements that can be developed on top. So I'd like to if I can, and I realize all of those things are important, Mr. Washington, I do. But as the A&E team, as the designers are developing what the covers would look like, the programming is helping us understand what the covers need to look like in order to develop the programming. And so if we can't get to consensus about what the cover design is, it'll be difficult for us to then move into programming elements. So I just wanted to lend that as we move this conversation. I think all of it is important, and we want to hear authentically how you feel, because to me, that is an indication that maybe we haven't done the best job in communicating all of the information to you all. So all of this is key. So I want you to know that I respect and hear what all of you all are saying. And so I don't know if there's an opportunity, Gina or Nolan here. I want to respect the HAAB members, and I want to respect the ICA's time and involvement here and how we might be able to move the process forward and continue the conversation. This is not a spiel about cutting you off and not allowing you to speak for the community, because that's why we have you here, okay? So
I think, excuse me, Erica, for interrupting, but I think Kevin wanted to speak as well.
Yes, sir.
I'm fine. I typed in the chat. I don't really need airtime. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what I'm asking for. Design-wise, it's like, could we have a could-be scenario, complete with lot sizes and the number of dwellings that could fit cover and also on the restored street grids? Because I think that's going to speak a lot better to community concerns.
Thank you.
I agree.
I also saw Andrew Clark unmute.
No, he said it. I mean, I think in maximizing potential for the area, as you start looking at the design, you start looking at where streets and greenways go. If we don't have an opportunity to really like imagine what the east side looks like from a perspective of what was cut off, we can now put it right on top of a freeway, and we can also put it in the areas that make sense. But if you don't do that, we're now cutting off opportunities for connectivity. We're cutting off opportunities to the water. We're cutting off opportunities for neighborhood activity, where now we should be imagining those things in this possibility now today. And the rest of it's economics, and we'll figure that part out. You know, those are the things that make sense. And those are things why we're also here as well. But let's imagine what this looks like in its maximum potential, with all the land, all the way going to the water, looking at, you know, the west side and looking at the potential for, you know, density. And then also there is a concern. Are there opportunities for home ownership in neighborhoods? So all of those things have to make sense as well. But you can't have that if we're limiting ourselves into a discussion where we can't imagine yet. And so that's where I want to be at. That's where me as a HAAB member wants to be at, is what does this design really actually talk about for us from a neighborhood perspective and restorative perspective. And part of that restorative perspective also has to be a part of, you know, the economics. So, but you can't get the full economic potential without being able to unlock all of that access that Gina and Nolan and the team are talking about. You can't get those ideas. You're just going to be hamstrung. And so let's get to that point, and then let's start talking about where we go from there. But I have an idea, and we'll, you know, as I get more information, we'll, you know, I'll continue to weigh in a little bit more, but I have some ideas.
Mr. Washington, I see you've unmuted. Natalie, if you could put up the question slide that
please.
the ICA team has, and to you, Mr. Washington, now.
I got no problem with the economic development strategy that for those covers. Got no problem for that. What I got a problem with is who's going to be the recipient of the economic aspect of those things. Okay, and so that's the concern, because not only does those covers represent somebody occupying them, but what yields from those as a continuation into the community, people will also be benefiting from. So we have to be a little bit cognizant of where the revenue at the end of the day, who's going to be benefiting from what it is that we so ingeniously invest in developing and getting clear about. Okay, about those covers. So that's my only point.
No, and I think you're right. And I'll ride with you on that point. But I think it's you think of it as a URA that's being developed by us, for us, and with this group in mind, right?
Yes.
And those are the people that are going to control what that destiny looks like. So as contracts get handed out, as things get determined, those are going to be the people, us, not those, us are going to be the people that actually figure out what that future looks like.
Exactly.
And that's part of what we're sitting around here talking about right now. So if we kind of elevate the concept of, okay, great, this is going to be amazing. We got a bunch of big buildings. Now we figure out the structure by which we can control what those decisions are, And so that's what we're going to sit around and talk about next. But in terms of making a decision to move forward with design, I want to look forward to the full potential. And we're not going to leave the room all of a sudden when we say, there's going to be freeways capped there, or there's going to be this cap there, whatever's going to happen. We're going to still be in the room talking about who's going to build on those freeways, who's going to occupy and do the programming, what all those different things that, Gina's laying out, who's going to be doing that. And so those are the conversations that cannot go forward until we actually tackle what our mission is right now, right?
Or what the territory is that you have to work with. That's
Yeah.
And I think Erica was trying to explain that and she did it phenomenally. The issue here at this point in the process, we're not designing the buildings. We're not.
No.
So you're not going to see, to Keith's point, you're not going to. That it's assumed that all the things you're talking about, Keith, will be there because this will be controlled by a Black CDC, or a Black land trust that decides how each of these plots are going to get developed, right? So, and if you want to develop them at a lesser density, if the zoning allows it, then that will be possible. What we're trying to talk about right now is what is the footprint you get to work in? What is how do all the things that need to happen here because of the freeway exchange, because this is a multimodal center, how do these things need to be organized to maximize the land benefits, the available land that could come back to the community?
I see a couple of hands. Gina, I want to make sure we get to them so you all can hear from some of the other members. Srinivasa, if you would unmute yourself, I'd appreciate that.
Actually, why don't you let Estelle go first? I'm still trying to figure out how to frame my questions and thoughts.
Sure thing. Thank you. Ms. Estelle.
I think, or just speaking for myself, my thought is that what's preventing me anyway from an accurate evaluation of the options that are presented to us is there's a lack of trust. Is what's being asked from us is an endorsement of something. But how can we give an endorsement or a proper evaluation if there's no trust that what we're evaluating will be accepted or even followed through with? And I that's kind of what I'm kind of hearing from what my peers are saying, or even what I would say. And that's kind of why I haven't even like a zoning thing, because I know when I was trying to reach out to community organizations as a single family house owner to try to get assistance in trying to save a home from tax foreclosure, you can't get assistance as a quote unquote private home owner in those situations. So are we in essence setting ourselves up for failure in these zoning situations? And that's something I didn't even think about until these conversations that I'm hearing today. So then maybe do we need to go back and sit with these options with the knowledge that we got today even?
That's great.
And evaluate that with that knowledge then? And kind of hear that, because I'm not a technical person. I don't have the advantage of these things. Like I asked for earlier with the respect of, you know, being educational people. Yeah. Like maybe we need the time, like Mr. Washington was asking, like we need the time as educated people to sit with these evaluations, and not, like, my concern is as this HAAB committee that we will be tokenized. I definitely don't want us to be tokenized. So can we not go back and sit with this information after this? Is that part of the process, kind of? Can there be a step added to this process where we get the plans on a paper thing, those get emailed to us, we get to see this in this process like we are now,
right? And
then we can come back kind of and look at it. Great. Maybe that should be an added part of the process, not a part of that flow chart. Maybe a step needs to be added to that flow chart, maybe, where,
yeah, I think that's a great suggestion,
where we're adding to it, because I think that there's elements that we haven't even thought of as individuals that aren't being brought to it, that maybe in our individual experiences as a diaspora to the albino community that we haven't even thought of. Like I just thought of, you know, the zoning things that have happened to us, maybe some injustices that we may have experienced individually that commercially won't be answered, even as opportunities that were granted on these covers or whatever. That won't help individual home owners. Commercial opportunities won't help individual homeowners, won't help home ownership. Who are we creating these opportunities for? Who are we creating this access for? Who are we creating this transportation access for? Us? We aren't there.
Those are all really great points.
Sorry, I don't know. Sorry, no. I don't mean to be grumpy or whatever, but I'm kind of grumpy.
I don't feel like that at all.
Into this. I mean, I started out grumpy, as you guys saw. So I'm gonna keep that grumpy energy. Sorry.
I don't feel like that. Estelle, what I would say is that you are passionate about this process, and we appreciate your input there. I will share with you that in another group, we often don't have time to get through all of the elements that we need to accurately and to thoroughly get your feedback. Nolan, I wanted you to, I know that you wanted to share something in regards to Estelle's initial comments.
Yeah, there were, at the beginning, there were a few points made, and I wanted to provide some clarification. We're not asking for an endorsement. We're not asking for you to give your seal of approval on anything. We have been asked to generate scenarios that are better and more responsive to the community vision, if possible. So in order for us to do that, we need to speak with people who are in the community and can speak on behalf as leaders, as well as residents and others who have been participating in our workshops, so that we can, when we generate those, we can say, yeah, so here's some things we've generated that are in response to the community. The reason we have this checkpoint in this part of our process is for you to tell us, yeah, you didn't hear us right. Or, yeah, you did hear us right. That is great. That is exactly what we want. Keep moving that forward. Here's some changes you can make to make it even better. Or something different altogether. And Mr. Modica's comments are a great example of something that we didn't study. And frankly, we didn't hear a lot of in the first work session, but it's an interesting response to the drawings we showed, which was, you know, I'd like to see some single family and some duplex, right? So that's very helpful feedback for us to think about. All right, what is it that you didn't maybe even know in February that you wanted to see, but now that you've seen our drawings, you have some ideas for other things you'd like to see. So the process is really geared for you to let us know what you see that you like, what you see that you don't like, what you don't see that you wish we would have put in, because we have another 2 months to continue to generate these things. As it pertains to the governance and who owns it and who decides and how do we prevent getting taken advantage of, all of those questions, and I think your highlighting of the trust issue is so important, and I respect that tremendously. But I think we should turn all of those questions into statements.
Yeah.
Design this so this doesn't happen. Ensure that this doesn't happen, because at the end of the day, as we construct some scenarios and possibilities that may turn into a recommendation, our job, honestly, is to share with the Executive Steering Committee what are we hearing from the HAAB and what are we hearing from community workshops. And our job is to do that faithfully. And the opportunities that we have to meet with you, for example, next month, we will say, this is what we heard. And so we will give an opportunity not just for you to give feedback on our comments, but for us to give feedback on the way we are interpreting your feedback, so that you can then tell us, that's not what I meant. You've mischaracterized it. So I appreciate the passion. I identify with it. And I just want to make sure that you understand that our job is not to get a gold star from you, rip a bunch of information in front of you and get a gold star. Our job and our purpose in talking with you is for you to help us get it right.
That's great, Nolan. Thank you so much for that explanation. I want to go to Megan and then back to Srinivasa.
Thanks, Erica. I had a quick question just to follow up to Andrew Clark, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly in the comments there, just around how the highway covers fit into the broader neighborhood. I think, well, Andrew and John, everyone on the HAAB has provided a lot of great comment about that this evening. I want to frame up, the ask in terms of the highway cover designs is really around like what's the potential within our project area, and learning from you how that can be done in a way that doesn't preclude that broader neighborhood development and supports the neighborhood development in a way that is, supporting BIPOC businesses, all of the comments that you're saying. But I just want to make sure that we're focused on the highway cover area in light of what ODOT can provide as part of the project directly, and then how we can engage in broader partnerships in that larger neighborhood conversation as well. So I don't know if that was helpful, but I was hearing just some comments around broader neighborhood and want to make sure that we were kind of staying focused on the highway covers.
Thanks so much, Megan, for that. Srinivasa?
Yeah, I think both Estelle and Nolan's comments were really helpful for me. And Estelle, I'm on the same page with you. I think I had some questions that I've been trying to articulate, because I feel like there's some moving pieces that I thought, well, anyway, so I want to know, how do we change the zoning? I definitely think that looking at this, if there's 60% residential, if that's what we're looking at, or 49% in concept 1 and 5, and when I look at these pictures, they just look like large blocks of housing projects to me. And so I would like to know, how can ODOT push for and change the zoning so that there can be single family houses, because I think that's critical. And so to my response to discussion question number 2 is, land in the central city is definitely crucial for Albina residents. The other thing I was looking at is just the percentages for concept 1 and 5, 60% for residential to 49%. That was the 2 numbers I looked at. And then the 9% cultural, 12% cultural. If our focus is on land, housing, economic development, the percentages for the commercial office and commercial multi-use, I think, are too high. I would like to see the cultural numbers, the 9 and the 12%, be switched to the commercial office numbers. So we should be focusing much more on bringing Black culture in than bringing in commercial office space for that businesses may or may not be Black owned. And I would like to see within the residential number a breakdown of single family versus low density versus high density, with as little focus on high density as possible. We don't need to be jam packing our community members into these tiny little apartments and such, condos, however you want to describe it. Another thing I wanted to circle back to make sure that I understood correctly, because we went past it kind of quickly at the beginning of the call. It seems like there's consideration now about moving the freeway further, I think you all said west, away from the school. If that's an option, then I want to look at moving it even further away from the school if that's going to improve air quality and whatnot. So can y'all come back with more information on if it's 25 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet away, how does that correlate to the environmental impacts and whatnot for the school? So if Portland Public Schools has asked for a certain amount of space for the freeway to be away from the school, I want to know what those numbers are and what changed. Why is ODOT now considering moving this when at the beginning it seemed like there was not an opportunity to move that? My last piece is the numbers for COAC, the recommendations around the workforce development programs. If you look at those numbers, I think it was 86% male and 75% white. So anytime I see a statistic that's focusing on Black and minority folks, I like to flip it and look at where's the majority. I think those numbers are still too high. I think we need to have a requirement for one, calling out Black women and Black men to be counted specifically within those numbers, and then to change them so that's not going to be contractors or workforce development programs that are 75% white and 86% male. So that's all of my thoughts that I had. I think this was a lot of information. I'm still trying to digest most of it.
Thank you, Srinivasa. I see Mr. Washington's hand, and then I might ask for some clarity around a couple of items. Mr.
Yes.
Washington?
Yes, you know, and the reason what sort of made me a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning of this is that there has been, as we have said, a plan for the last 15 years for the Soul District. And so obviously the Broadway commercial corridor zone, okay, has been businesses all of this long. And most people don't realize how impacted our community has been as far as small businesses over this COVID time in the last 2 years. And so we don't necessarily believe we are going to recover an iota close to what the perception or the thoughts are about what those numbers are going to look like. So any of the business pathways or quarterways that are going to be interrupted or disrupted, we're concerned about because we can't really afford to lose many more of them, okay? And the other part of it was, I don't have a problem with what goes on in the coverage. 4 and 5 look real good to me. But the only thing that I had a concern about was our community was hoodwinked in the past with this William Street deal, okay? And that every time I see any kind of economic drivers driving any other resources up that corridorway only leads me to believe that there was an agenda and a plan before time, which leads back into the trust issue again for me. So that was why I brought to light some of those topics and points.
So Erica, could I see, because we're, we've got another 10 minutes, and what I'd like to do is try to see whether we can kind of summarize where we are and then determine whether we were going to allow people to poll just to give us their, like John did in the chat, just to give us their notions about which of these scenarios feel like they provide the most benefit, the most potential benefit to the Black community. I'm not sure that people feel ready based on Estelle's comments, and I want to ask that question of whether people feel comfortable just ranking each of the scenarios based on how well they think they provide community opportunity and benefit with, assuming certain things. But I think it would be important also, what we heard, what I'm hearing is that there's a, anything that happens in this area needs to have a governance structure that's going to guarantee who and how that area gets controlled and developed. Is that correct? Is that a fair statement of that I've heard today from the HAAB members? I've also heard that, you know, that there's an interest in seeing lower density and potentially seeing some, where there's housing, seeing some opportunities for lower density housing options, and trying to see what potential would the current zoning would allow, correct? And I guess I want to make sure that we capture all of the things that you've said here today that are important for us to think about at the next stage of our process. And then I did hear one person indicate that land is the most important thing. You know, having land in the central city is the most important thing. So that would lead me to believe that those options that provide more land, the organization, those options of the layout of the ramps and the freeway cover that provide more land are preferred option, or would be more preferred. Is that a fair statement?
Which option would that be, Gianna? I'm wondering, could you, using that language, can you describe option 1 through 5? Because I'm still struggling from looking at these images to really know how are they different.
Yeah, can we go back to? I think
may I offer a comment before you go back to that?
Yes. Yes, Stephen,
So,
go ahead.
The primary differences in all of these concepts relate to the impact that the infrastructure, like the freeway off and on ramps, have on shaping the land on the ground and on the covers. Some are cut up more, some, like in schemes 4 and 5, allow, by rerouting those things that are like encouraged, they like divide up the area. So if you're putting a building in, like right next to a on-ramp or off-ramp, you're not only putting it next to the traffic from a air quality and noise perspective, but just in terms of quality of the area. But they allow you to then turn the development more inward toward the center of those parcels. But then, since we've been hearing that land is really important, we explored these other options of relocating that infrastructure to allow for, in one case, in option 4, a greater centralized parcel not interrupted by those factors and being more, say, safer, more healthy, et cetera. Or in the case of 5, taking that area and continuing the streets going through it to recreate the kind of scale of neighborhood and fabric that existed once before. And each of those scenarios allows for different kinds of the shape of development. And what I will say, not to make a value judgment, but just by way of it just being clear about the information, that area, Lower Albina, is now a very valuable location. So that land, before you put anything on it, has a certain value based on its potential for development. So if you downzone and say, okay, I'm going to take a piece of this land, it could have a 5-story building on it, and I'm going to rezone it so it's single family, 1-story or 2-story residential, then the land value goes down, and if the community is the one owning that land, that's a decision that the community has to make. Monetary value over quality of place value. So those are, you know, I hope that maybe helps clarify a little bit.
And let me expand on that, Stephen, because somebody else earlier in the chat asked, where is the money coming from to pay for this? And a good example is if you owned 4 pieces of property and you wanted to do something on these 2, you might have the option to sell these 2 over here to have money to do something on the other 2. And so the total maximum value that you have is in the entitlements, the zoning capacity of all of them. It gives you flexibility. And so I think it's important to note that what's being proposed in these different scenarios is not the exact land use mix that's being shown. That is a way of demonstrating the potential value. What's really being proposed through the governance in both scenarios is that there would be a community-led organization that would get to make decisions and priorities about what happens, who you partner with, where the money comes from, and where the money goes.
So there's a couple of ways that these could be dived into deeper. All right. One of them is that we do have an online open house that has this same information on it that allows you to rank each one of the scenarios, which you could go to. And I think you were sent all the information to access that online open house last week by Erica. And we can put it in the chat, you know, essentially how to do that. I guess I want to ask Erica, I want to ask people whether they would like to give us any blush of the things. They're not voting on these scenarios and they're not choosing scenarios. They're simply giving us a sense of which, given all the conversation, which they're ranking each one of the scenarios based on the things they say are important, land and other elements of the scenario. I want to ask the group whether they would feel
I don't know that we should do that tonight. I think we should give them the same option that we gave the executive steering committee.
Yeah.
We heard from folks that they need a bit more time to dive into, and maybe it is, again, participation in the online open house, or it is extending this time frame, you know, a few days to give folks the opportunity to submit that information to me that I can pass on to your team to make sure that we did lose a few members as well because of the shift from last week. And so Mr. Modica had to leave us, Ms. Leslie had to leave us. There are a couple of members who were on. So I would love the opportunity to engage. I believe that Ms. Sharon Gary Smith also had to depart to head to another meeting. I would love to be able to engage the entire board and ask them for their input in regards to these two very important questions.
I think that makes perfect sense.
Mr. Clark?
No, I was just going to echo what all the sentiments are really, whether it's skepticism, whether it's, you know, understanding what, you know, land is versus what, you know, the economics are. Whatever gives the most opportunity for most opportunity, the biggest impact for the actual land itself, the square that we're working with, is going to be something that I'm going to work on. As long as we're sitting here talking about how we actually govern that, how we actually work within that. And like I said before, it is a URA in itself. Like, how does that actually operate and function? Those are all different things, but I just want to caution us to not limit too much. And then there's something that was said earlier. There isn't really an equation between, you know, choosing between down zoning, you know, a property and actually, you know, making sure that it's, you know, going to its maximum potential. It's really, can we have it at its maximum potential and actually have great design, you know, and have connectivity and have neighborhoods. Like, all those things can function within this mix. There's a lot of property there. There's a lot of opportunity there, and it's centralized. And I think that as long as we look at, you know, the bigger picture, we can figure out how we can, you know, make sure that I guess per se, keep tabs on things and make sure that it is going to the benefit of the community. It is going to make sure that it looks like us and it is being built by us. So like, those are things that, you know, there's enough people around the table to make sure that we can keep tabs on that, or else, you know, none of us here that's spending all this time are doing our jobs. You know, we're just wasting time at that point.
Great, thank
So
you.
that's kind of my, my 2 cents for this meeting today. But I think it was a good meeting. I think a lot of good things came out of it. I think a lot of, real concerns that make sense that we can put on the table and we can actually talk about and actually have solutions and actually move forward and not be, paralyzed. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you always being thoughtful in that way. So Gina, for yourself, for Charles and Nolan, the ICA team, I want to thank you for your willingness to condense and to give us as much information as you can. I would like to recommend that I know that there's a deadline for this, so maybe I'm looking to you. If we can give the Historic Albina Advisory Board members a certain amount of days to be able to review the information a little more thoroughly, to participate in the online open house if their schedule allows, and then for me to gather that information and to report it back out to the ICA team. I realize today is the preferred date. I know that we have one group that is responding prior to Friday. Can we give this group until Monday? Thoughts?
I think Monday is fine, Erica.
Okay, thank you.
I think that will work fine. So it gives people a weekend. And, what I want to say to the HAAB members is we are grateful for your thoughtfulness, for your passion, for your concerns. We understand them. I understand them personally. I think our whole team understands, the lack of trust in the kind of experiences that our community has had with government and with these kinds of redevelopment schemes. So we greatly appreciate, you being champions and raising, being sure to be vigilant about making sure that this is not yet another opportunity that, is sold to the community, but doesn't really materialize anything of benefit that the community thought was coming back to it. So thank you so much for all of your thoughts and your comments and the time you've shared with us tonight. We are grateful for it. And we look forward to getting your feedback.
Yes, thank you, Gina. I'll be making sure to identify that with the HAAB and get those responses to you at the end of the weekend. Megan, I wanted to go to you. If y'all indulge me just for a couple of moments, we'll be ending the meeting shortly.
Thank you, Erica. And Srinivasa, I wanted to follow up on your question around the southbound realignment consideration. So the consideration right now is that the existing highway structure and corridor would stay in its same location. The question is whether the new auxiliary lane would be added on the east side, so on the side of Harriet Tubman Middle School, or if it would be added on the west side, away from Harriet Tubman Middle School. So I just wanted to clarify the option.
Thank you. So it's the auxiliary lane. That's the part that I missed before. Okay,
yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll come back with more information to provide more detail on a lot of the other items that you brought up as well. But I wanted to just get in on that piece of clarity.
Thank you so much, Megan. Next slide, please. As we begin to wrap up the meeting, next slide, please. We're going to continue to have this conversation working with the independent cover assessment team. You all will also be receiving the branding concepts for your input as to how we should move. As Megan mentioned, the design team will be coming to share some more ideas about the urban design and also regarding performance measures and how we produce outcomes from the values that the project has established as a guideline. Next slide, please. I want to just highlight quickly that we are looking to have you, if you can, participate in the independent cover assessment online open house. We'll provide that link to you. It's in the chat. I will make sure to also email that to you once again so that it's in top of your inbox, as I know things get overwhelming there. We'll be looking to meet again in May. Potentially that will be a joint meeting between this group and the Executive Steering Committee. We are also potentially looking in May as well for another opportunity for this group to collaborate with the Community Oversight Advisory Committee, which is the COAC They are responsible for helping to monitor the DBE workforce goals with the CMGC. Next slide. Dr. Holt, I'd like to ask you to close us out if you would.
My delight. Can we go to gallery view, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. A couple of things that I want to comment on, and that is much of your question and concern is echoed in the work of the Executive Steering Committee also. And so there are questions and concerns that are being weighed around the design scenarios and perspectives. But here's what is significant, I think, for everyone, especially the HAAB members to know. If you aren't aware of it, let me step back for a moment and contextualize a few things. The sunsetting of the Community Advisory Committee and the standing up of the Historic Albina Advisory Board was for this very intent. It was to bring together a group of people who have historic ties and connection to the community. And myself and Erica Warren were charged with, Tri-Excellence was charged with helping to recruit and establish and bring together some people who could do exactly what you're doing. So there is an intent to create a pathway and an opportunity for critical thought around what happens, who does it, and who benefits. So I know that there has, in the circle and in the conversation, there's been this trust theme that's been raised. The reason why you're sitting here is to do exactly what you did tonight. So there is no railroading. There is no bait and switch. Tri-Excellence was charged to do and put together a group. We brought up the fact that the prior group did not reflect the kinds of concerns that we're talking about. And we wanted to make sure the integrity by which we do what we do. We wanted to make sure that our community had its best opportunity. I'm native to the city. I have passion for this work beyond us just getting through a process. No, we have to do this right. And so that's why you're here. I don't want you to feel any angst about your concern. And Estelle, you put it in the context of being a little grumpy. Well, bring your grumpiness every time we come together. If that's what we want to call it. Bring your critique, bring your thought, bring your passion, bring your energy, bring your question. Call into accountability. That's what all of us want to have happen, because this isn't about you or me. This is about the generations that's going to follow. We have an opportunity to do something generationally good. And the only way we're going to do that is by being who we are in this space. That's why you were brought together. So I was hoping that more members would still be in the space to hear these words. That's why you're brought into this space. So that's the first thing. Second thing I want to say in regard to the ICA's work. Thank you. Thank you for your energy, your effort, and your time. HAAB, you don't have to like any of what they present. You're not being forced to decide this is it. You might want different aspects of each one. That's what you're in this space to do, to think through what's going to be the best possibilities for the community. And so again, there is no bait and switch. There is no turn, as it was mentioned, that now you're being pushed in a direction. You're not being pushed in a direction. You're being presented information to evaluate, to process, and to think through. And the third thing, and the last thing that I will give, is the work between the HAAB, the Executive Steering Committee, and the COAC. Our intent is to do this differently, and to do it in a way that it is collaborative and not one group pitted against another group, because we've seen that. We've been a part of that. We're not going to be a part of that. And there's a responsiveness and an openness to support doing business differently. That's why I was hired. That's why we were brought into this space. We were brought into this space because of the integrity that Tri-Excellence brings into this kind of work. And so there is no game being played. We're trying to do this as thoroughly as possible, as responsible as possible to make a difference generationally. There's no way my name's going to be on something. Again, I'm native. I'm third generation, just like Erica, in this city. We're not putting our names on stuff that is going to be for the benefit of anything other than our community. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your effort. Thank you. We selected you for this purpose. And that's what we want to have happen. It may be uncomfortable for others. That's okay. That's part of the process. It may not fit into the confines. That's okay. That's part of the process. But what it will produce is the appropriate outcomes for a generation of people who can't fight for themselves. So with that being stated, thank you. Thanks for your time tonight. Erica, well done. And all of the team and all of your work. Have a wonderful evening, and we will be in touch very soon.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all.
Thank
Good
you.
night. We appreciate you.